Has the push to promote gender transitions to kids in public schools finally crossed the line? Elon Musk says yes as he prepares to move his businesses out of California and into Texas. But what about parents right here in Virginia who are still wrestling with school districts like Fairfax County who continue to ignore their objections? We discuss all this today. And to provide timely perspective, we bring you the personal testimony of teenage detransitioner Chloe Cole. Welcome to Speak Up Virginia, equipping you to speak up on the life, family, and freedom issues that matter most to you. From the Family Foundation, I'm your host, Candi Cushman. Welcome, everybody. Glad to have you with us for Speak Up Virginia. And I'm super excited to have with me Jessi Blakely, State Director of our Family Foundation Action Team. Now, normally she is behind the scenes helping us out with the whole production of this thing. So it's exciting to have you in the hot seat today.
Yeah, it's great to be with you and fun to be in front of the camera today.
Yes. And we have lots of fun things for you to talk about.
Yeah, this is going to be quite the episode, I think.
Right. All right. Well, now that things have kind of settled down with the campaign, sort of. Well, actually, before we jump ahead, let me get your thoughts on the campaign. So we've kind of survived the huge ups and downs of the roller coaster ride. And now it kind of looks like we're evening out into neck and neck. You know, we got Kamala Harris in there now. It looked like the polls were showing us back kind of where we were before. Is that right?
Well, not exactly. So Kamala Harris has brought all the Democrats together. She's gotten endorsements from all the delegates. So she is the presumptive nominee at this point on the other side. And while the Democrats have been saying that the polls are recovering, she's polling slightly higher than Biden was, but there's still a lot of these key swing states, Nevada, Pennsylvania, even Virginia, where she's still trailing Trump. So
really?
It may have tightened up a little bit in some of these places, but her numbers really haven't recovered substantially to the point where Biden's were pre-debate.
So Virginia, she's still a little behind?
It's still tight in Virginia. I mean, it's going to be tight regardless in Virginia because we tend to lean a little bit blue, but it's within the margin of error here still. So it very well could swing for Trump.
Okay, well, it's going to be a nail biter, basically.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's definitely a great year for folks to be engaged, to stay engaged, because there's going to be a lot of work to do between now and November.
Yes. All right, thanks for that little update. We'll keep you posted. But now that things have kind of sort of settled into a regular campaign pace, we've had a chance for other things to be covered in news headlines. And one of those things is the continued aggressive push for normalizing this radical transgender ideology. And of course, I'm sure a lot of you saw these headlines coming out of the Olympics opening ceremony. And really, the thing that stuck out to me was just this push of the whole transgender theme. I know everybody's talking about the Last Supper parody.
Yeah, it's been all over my timeline on X. I've seen everybody's hot takes on this. But one of the comments that I saw that I thought was really insightful was from Al Mohler, which was that every society, and I think we'll put it up on screen, every society without exception coalesces around a dominant religious impulse and associated symbols. The sheer horror of the secular replacement is what we saw in Paris. It's deliberately pornographic corruption of Christianity. And this is something that I think a lot of our audience has probably seen. And so, he makes the point that we shouldn't miss how intentional this is. Yeah. And they know what they're doing. And I think that's true.
And to his point, well, let me back up and just mention it wasn't just the whole Last Supper parody thing. I mean, transgenderism was kind of a theme throughout. So you had this, you had drag queens running with the torch. You had a child dancing with drag queens. There was also this whole random, just really, it's so sad, I think, really horrifying that we would try to normalize this kind of thing. But, and I guess not we, but the Paris culture or whatever, the Olympic or whatever. But this image of a threesome, having a little tryst in the library, I mean, that really is just pushing that in billions of people's faces that are just maybe trying to have some family entertainment with the Olympics, and you're trying to normalize just sexual perversion. So when I think about what Al Mohler is saying, really it gets back to this is the emptiness and the perversion that you get, there's almost shallowness of soul that you get when you try to replace the depth of God's design with worshiping humans,
Well,
right?
yeah, and I think, it's very telling that when these sort of different ideologies try to subvert what is normal and wholesome, and what most people's lives are and families are like, they always target Christianity. They always take Christian imagery and pervert that. And I think, that is more reminder to us that we need to be a good witness in the world, because the world doesn't like who we are, and the world doesn't like the principles that we promote. But we know that what we're promoting is the good and is what is best for people. So I just think it's interesting that they always choose Christian symbolism.
Because they have to replace with
Exactly.
in our own image and idol.
Yeah.
Now, the official Olympic Games X account apparently put out something about this threesome that was being promoted, and they tried to justify it with a quote from the famous author Victor Hugo. Quote, "The freedom to love is no less sacred than the freedom to think. The freedom to love is no less sacred than the freedom to think." So they're kind of justifying this all in the name of freedom. And that got me thinking about what Scripture says in 2 Corinthians about freedom, because
Yeah.
the Bible tells us.
Worth saying, and especially because Victor Hugo was famously a strong Christian, and that was something that pervaded all of his books.
He would be horrified.
Yeah,
I
I
thought
think
it
so.
as well,
Yeah.
Jessi. But it helps us remember in Scriptures in Corinthians, 2 Corinthians, it talks about where the Spirit of the Lord is, there is freedom. So true freedom. I'm going to come back to that later. But did anybody else think like I did about, if you remember a few Olympics ago when the Chinese did this incredible presentation of like 1,000 drummers or something?
Yeah, there was that one, the Russian opening ceremony. I remember a lot of people were showing that, where they had, ballroom dancing and all kinds of things like that. And the Olympic ceremonies really traditionally have been a way for the host countries to show off the best and the most beautiful things about their culture. And
this is what we got now.
Yeah, this is what it is now, which is really sad, because
It's scary,
there's
too.
a lot of beautiful French culture that I wish they had highlighted.
Yes, like Victor Hugo. Why can't we have a tribute?
Exactly.
Well, and I do feel like that if we were going to look at the culture right before the fall of the Roman Empire, this would be what we're looking at.
Yeah, it's just, sort of paganism and sort of bacchanalia and all these places. And
Yeah.
it's sad that this is what gets highlighted, above the beauty of, what could have been shown instead.
All right. Well, just to mention some other headlines on this whole push for transgenderism, I don't know if you also might have seen this really incredible interview that billionaire Elon Musk did, where he said that one of his children had been affected by this gender transitioning push, and seemed, just very heartbroken about that. And he even said that was one reason he's committed to destroying the woke mind virus. And I guess as part of that whole resistance, he has now moved all of his companies, is moving X and SpaceX from California to Texas.
Yeah, so this comes kind of as a result of California Governor Gavin Newsom's recent action, where he signed a law into effect, and it's kind of a crazy new policy that basically ensures parents are going to be kept in the dark where it comes to gender experimentation with their children in schools. And that's something that, is being actively promoted by teachers and by school curriculum, as we know, and we've faced some of that here. Luckily, we've got some laws here that the governor has signed, some policies that help. But, I was listening to that podcast the other day. Elon was on with Jordan Peterson, and you can really tell just how painful it's been for him and for his family. And he even talks about just being a parent on the receiving end of hearing that gender ideology and kind of the narrative that...
And believing the lie.
Yeah, the narrative that I think we'll hear later from Chloe about how the medical community really failed her. And, a similar case is true with his family. And for folks who maybe have not, been based in a Christian worldview or didn't really know, they get scared. They get pressured and told that their children, may choose to end things or may go down a really dark path if they don't kind of allow this confusion to be.
No, it is emotional blackmail.
Yeah, it's horrible.
I'm glad that Governor Youngkin and our education department have made it clear schools should not have policies that purposely deceive or hide things from parents, because obviously, as Jessi's pointing out, these can have long-term impacts on kids like Chloe, like we're going to hear today. And polls show that the public does not want this stuff pushed on young children. The majority of people are against that, pushing young children down this path. But despite that fact, we still have school districts like Fairfax County that are going the opposite direction and apparently don't care what parents think.
Yeah, so earlier this month, news came out that the Fairfax School Board unanimously voted for more gender identity lessons for high school and middle school students. And they've also started moving ahead with plans for what they call gender spectrum instruction for kids as young as elementary school. And so, this is just something they seem to be charging ahead with, even though we've seen lots of, they sent out a community feedback survey, actually, and it was pretty clear that the majority of parents and Fairfax citizens who responded to that were not in favor of this. But it seems that the sort of leftist school board members in Fairfax County are just charging ahead regardless of what the community thinks.
I got to question why they even did a survey at this point if they're just going to do their own thing anyway.
Yeah.
I mean, it really is a slap in the face of parents to just totally ignore that, because it was clear from that survey the majority were against it. But, going back to the scripture I was talking about before, in light of all of this, because we can get discouraged if we don't turn to scripture to give us a bigger picture perspective in the midst of all this insanity. And, I was talking about where the Spirit of the Lord is, there is freedom. And we see the secularists, like in Paris, trying to exalt a false kind of freedom that actually just enslaves people further, as we will hear from Chloe Cole explaining that. And that's where 2 Corinthians 4:4 reminds us, quote, "Since through God's mercy we have this ministry," and I think that means, Jessi, the ministry of sharing true freedom.
Absolutely.
Yeah. We do not lose heart. Rather, we have renounced secret and shameful ways. We do not use deception, nor do we distort the word of God. On the contrary, by setting forth the truth plainly, we commend ourselves to everyone's conscience in the sight of God. And that gets me into sharing Chloe Cole's testimony today, because she is sharing the truth of what happened to her and how she was enslaved in a wrong path that, adults were manipulating her into, right?
Yeah, and, we had the opportunity to have Chloe here last summer. She's really just a super courageous young woman who's sharing her story and really the difficult path that she's had to walk. When she was 12, she told her parents that she thought she was a boy. And by the age of 15, she had a double mastectomy, and she really still struggles with complications from that today. And but she's come out of that, and she's restored to her identity, and she has been just a powerful voice for sharing how manipulative the sort of gender ideology can be, and how difficult it is for children that young who are being targeted with this really to understand what's going on with them when all they hear is people telling them you're born in the wrong body. And so, it was really wonderful to have her here to share her story. She was down with us in Virginia Beach helping to push for some of these policies. But I really think y'all will love it if you missed our episode last summer. It's just a powerful testimony and a great story to share with folks who are still learning about this.
Yeah, we need to get more stories. We need to just have these true testimonies out there more, like Chloe Cole's. So without further ado, we bring you Chloe Cole. All right, well, I got to mention one thing that you're sharing with us. You have this adorable dog that I'm sure is a huge stress reliever.
My sister's taking care of her right now.
Yeah, tell us about the dog and her name. And
her name's Yoshi. We think she's like a terrier, Pomeranian, Chihuahua mix, because she has like all those features. Like she kind of has like a long body, kind of stubby legs a little bit, and like she's got huge ears, like little radars.
Does. We're gonna stick a picture up. Hopefully, it's one where you can see her ears for our YouTube viewers. So
she's a dork.
That's Yoshi. She looks adorable. All right. Well, as I mentioned, you're going to hear about Chloe's story of walking out of transgenderism today. But before we get into that, I did want to talk about what brought her to Virginia Beach in the first place. And that is that you came out specifically to really stand alongside parents, students, families in Virginia Beach. Tell us why you felt like it was worth coming all this way, working this into your travel plans to help local families.
I mean, it's important to get to the legislation and to stop this from happening legally. But it's equally as important to get to the people, to the communities. That's something that isn't really focused on a whole lot. And I mean, this has like silently made its way into schools. I graduated high school last year and I went to a public school in California. So you think I'd be learning all about this in school, right? Even like, especially like while I'm going through it. But it was never, ever brought up in class. Things like sexuality or identity or gender and such. I never heard about those things in class ever. So I was kind of shocked to learn that this has made its way into classrooms all across the states.
Yeah, even at preschool, kindergarten level, through storybooks and things like that. So, yeah. Yeah, I like what you said about that, we're kind of focused on legislation, but people in communities are feeling pretty beleaguered with what they're trying to come up, what they're trying to battle with schools pushing this. And we heard from people in Virginia Beach that they were just feeling so weary, like the media's ignoring them, the school board members weren't listening to them. What would your encouragement be now that you've met some of these people in Virginia Beach and you kind of experienced that? What would your encouragement be to these people on the ground trying to stand up to local school boards that aren't listening to them?
Just keep trying, because somebody's listening.
Mm-hmm. And it's worth
and the more
it for
people
people
listening,
like you.
The more people who will be fighting.
Yeah.
Because most people agree that this should never be done on children, that this is wrong. And I mean, all it really takes to see why that is just having a brain and just hearing experiences of people like me, of these kids who are being taught about this in class. And these kids, these girls who are having to deal with the opposite sex entering their bathrooms and such.
Yeah, and I like what you said about the more people that will hear about it, the more they hear about it, the more they will do something about it. But they might have to hear about it a few times, right?
Right. And I mean, I'm just some random teenager from California. Like, if I can do this, anybody can do it. And everybody should be involved in this fight.
Yeah, like that. Well, let me just quickly bring people up to speed with what's going on in Virginia Beach and what Chloe was speaking into exactly. Because for the past several months, LGBTQ activists, including a student group, have been really high pressuring the school board there with demands to basically keep parents in the dark, to have policies or keep policies that put parents out of the picture, to, just cut them out of the process if their children are experimenting with their gender identity while they're at school, or if the school is allowing, for example, biological boys to use female spaces like bathrooms and locker rooms. The policies were not including parents in that whole process. They were getting shut out. And as I said, they were feeling discouraged because it's just weeks and weeks of this high pressure. And really, the school board members in Virginia Beach were hearing predominantly one side of the story. And so we were honored to be able to bring Chloe out to help give the other side of that story and bring some balance to this issue. And she stood alongside a crowd of about 100 parents at this press conference rally. We did a Protect Every Kid rally where she shared her comments and then went straight into the school board and spoke directly to the school board. And you gave them a pretty strong message. You did not mince words. Tell us a little bit about what you were trying to say to the school board.
Well, I just wanted to give an account of my experience as somebody who's actually been through the process of both socially and medically transitioning as a kid, and just telling them why this isn't appropriate to teach to high school kids and younger.
Yeah. And what was the most important thing that you said to them? Because you looked them straight in the face and you challenged them, right? What was your most important message you wanted to get across to them?
Well, at the end, I told them, like, it's your responsibility as a school district to make sure that your kids are, to look after their well-being. Because if a kid is in severe distress, or if they're separated from their family, they can't focus on their studies. They can't learn. It's not a proper learning environment if they're having to deal with the stress of either these sex segregated spaces being invaded. These spaces that they're supposed to feel comfortable in, like the bathroom or the locker room, and the showers and such. Or if they're being transitioned behind their parents' backs and they're dealing with that sort of stress on their own without any real guidance or support. They can't learn. They can't learn like that.
Yeah. And I wrote down one thing you said. That was, you said, my life has been destroyed by people like you who lied to them. What did you mean by that?
I mean, pretty much all of the adults around me were giving in, not necessarily my teachers or my parents, but my doctors were the ones who were telling me, like, oh, yeah, you are a boy. And they weren't really pushing back on my belief that I was actually a boy, despite being biologically female. They just went along with my feelings, and it was all about my feelings rather than my needs. And it doesn't matter whether you're doing that as a doctor or a teacher. No adult has any right to lie to a child like that. It's dangerous.
Why did you need them? You know, you were 12. Why did you need them to actually push back a little bit and look more into the actual needs behind that?
Because it wasn't what I needed. It was just how I felt. I mean,
what did you
need? You don't have to just give in to the whims and the wishes of a child all the time, you know? Because, I mean, what good is a parent if that's all you have to do, right?
Yeah.
Or an adult, really. I had a lot of psychiatric issues that weren't being addressed. It was all just kind of pushed aside in favor of, well, the issue is it's her gender. That's where all the distress is coming from. And once her dysphoria is resolved, then she'll be okay and she'll be her real self. But that's not true. That's very obviously not true. I would never actually be a boy. And yet I was being treated and referred to as such.
One of the biggest calls to action that came out of that whole evening, parents were urging the school board to align the school board's policies, because they currently have bad policies in place regarding these things, to align them with policies that put parents back in the driver's seat that are expected to be released any day now by Governor Youngkin's education department. And this was the thing that parents were asking for that would be an important step toward restoring balance in this issue. What are your thoughts on, well, let me just explain one thing. The old policies that were put forth under Governor Northam's administration and are currently still on the books, they, you know, one of the biggest concerns is that they have wording right now that basically instructs schools how to hide things from parents or even deceive. So what it kind of says is, if your kid is experimenting with gender identity, then at school refer to them by the name they've chosen and the pronouns they've chosen, but in front of the parents, you know, go back to the legal name and what the pronouns that the parents are used to. What are your thoughts on that kind of a policy? Why does it need to be changed? What's the real harm there?
It's so perverted. I can't even believe that that's a thing. Because as a parent, you have the right to know everything about your child, what they're going through, what they're doing. I mean, how else are you supposed to take care of them if you don't know what's going on? It's really not any adult's right to get between a child and their parents and family. And
you've experienced personally in your family people getting in between you and your parents. Tell us about that.
It wasn't school staff, but it was doctors. And they told my mom and dad that there wasn't any other choice but to allow me to transition, because they said I would be at risk of suicide if not. But the end outcome of me wasn't going to be suicide. I think, if anything, I would have just naturally desisted over time. I mean, we saw that this treatment didn't work out for me. it's hard to know what would have happened if I didn't go through it, because what happened. But I mean, children who are gender dysphoric, they trend towards outgrowing it naturally by the time they've hit adulthood and they've gone through puberty. But I wasn't suicidal until after I started transitioning. I wasn't suicidal over the idea that I might not be able to, but I was afraid of what might happen if I wasn't allowed to, you know. It was a fear of the unknown more than anything. And because I also thought that it was my only choice. I didn't know that I had a choice not to transition. There was a lot about transitioning that I wasn't informed of, actually.
That's interesting that you didn't know you had a choice. You just felt like, well, this is the path I got to take.
Yeah, I mean, from pretty much every resource I read up on, that seemed to be the case. Just talking about like transitioning and gender dysphoria, it was the only treatment really presented for it.
And there was tremendous pressure on your parents as well as you, just with this false choice. I just think that's so incredible what you described to me. Tell us about that choice they basically presented to your parents.
I mean, it absolutely is a false dichotomy, because those are not the only two options. They should not be the only two options.
I mean, and what were those options they gave?
Either having a dead daughter or a live son, a live transgender son, they said. And the way they go about it, they didn't say it outright. They just kind of like hint at it. It's very much a form of emotional manipulation on the part of the doctors.
And are you present for some of these conversations?
I don't believe I was. I had no memory of this. I have no recollection. There are a few appointments that my doctors had between my parents without me, I think, and I believe that was one of them. This was after my parents started getting concerned, because like I was pushing more and more every day to go on the medical path, and they just weren't sure why. Like they didn't know why I just couldn't wait until I was legally an adult, when I would be maybe more capable of making a decision around this, more mature, having experienced more of my life and just more knowledgeable about the world. And they were concerned that it was something that I might regret, because it's a huge decision, and it was a lot to expect out of a 12, 13-year-old kid. And they knew that very well. And they were pretty sensible.
And this is why it's worth it to you to go to these local communities and stand beside parents that are getting this kind of pressure. But let's back up a little bit and just talk about how this journey all started for you. So how did it begin for you at age 12, where you started experiencing this struggle over your gender?
It wasn't really a natural thing, I don't think. I mean, I'd always been kind of a tomboy, and once puberty started, which I had a fairly early start to puberty. I was about 9 years old when I was starting to develop visible breasts. And I had issues with my body image, of course, because I started so young and was kind of being thrust towards adulthood earlier than I expected. And it was really difficult to deal with. But I didn't... There were times when I thought, like, I'll never be pretty. Like, I'll never be feminine enough. Like, why am I a girl? I think I'd just be better off if I were a boy, you know? But I didn't actually think that I was a boy until I was introduced to the trans ideology, which was through social media, namely on Instagram, through communities that were kind of centered around like video games and content that I liked.
Yeah, that's interesting. So when you look at the biggest factors kind of pushing you down this path, so social media is big. Video games too?
Not video games themselves, but the communities around them. Okay. For some reason, there's like a large portion of a lot of the users in communities around a lot of video games and like shows and cartoons and stuff are people who identify as LGBT and like overwhelmingly like trans or non-binary and such.
And so was it mainly this online world? What about school? Were there messages in school?
No,
Not
no.
at that time.
No, not at
Okay,
all.
that's interesting. So some parents need to be aware of this, what is out there in the online world. And did this happen because you're, online asking questions, or?
No, I mean, I wasn't really directly interacting with anybody at the start of my transition. I was just kind of browsing these communities and just watching them, just listening to these people talking about their life experiences and about their transitions. And I was very intrigued. I was very interested because it was very novel and very seemingly cheery and bright and colorful with all these flags and new ways of describing yourself, and this focus on like introspection and self-discovery and becoming happier and whole and building a community around yourself.
So it looks like a place to channel some of this inner anxiety, a place where you can be empowered with that. And
I think part of the reason why a lot of these communities that are seemingly unrelated with transitioning, I think part of the appeal is that like a lot of these kids are socially awkward, they're not very close with their families or their peers, and they don't really have much of a sense of community around them, and so they kind of seek something online, and it makes it easier to get sucked into this kind of thing. I mean, that's certainly how it was for me, and I've kind of seen this pattern with different people as well.
Now, how did you get to the next step where you're actually, in these counseling or medical situations? So how did it jump from online to actually going down this path?
Yeah, I mean, after some time, of course, I was starting to question my own identity, and eventually I thought, I don't really know what it means to be a girl. I don't feel like I'm supposed to be one. I don't really fit in with them at all. And I think it just makes sense that I was destined to be a boy, and I'm going to pursue that. And so I kind of quietly just started transitioning over time, telling some very close friends from school about it. Got backlash from most of them, actually. Started getting shorter haircuts and changing the way that I dressed, and then eventually I came out to one of my older sisters, some of my other family members, and then eventually my mom and dad through a letter. They were naturally pretty concerned, as supportive as they wanted to be, and they saw right away that this was related to my mental health struggles. They knew that it was a psychiatric problem, and so they decided to start sending me to the therapist because they thought that would help. They thought that the therapist would help me to introspect and kind of discover where these feelings were coming from and help me with learning to cope with them until I was an adult and would be better at making a decision around this. But that didn't happen. It didn't work out that way.
And then I guess by the time you're kind of down this path and asking to pursue these things, then your parents are getting pressured and just kind of afraid to counter that because of what they're hearing about the risk. So, yeah,
right.
Okay, and then it just goes on from there, I guess.
They'd been concerned about me for years because, I was already having struggles with school and making friends and getting along with my peers and such from a very, very young age. And I had a previous diagnosis of ADHD, which I think was erroneous. And a lot of my ADHD-like traits could be attributable to me just using the technology very young, and also from actually being on the spectrum, which I still haven't gotten like an actual diagnosis for. I've had 2 or more screenings in my life, several screenings actually, and each time the response that me and my parents got was just like, "Oh, well, you're so smart, like you're so well spoken," basically just telling me like, "You're not autistic, you're not stupid enough to be."
Wow. And it is obvious that you are highly intelligent. But what would your advice be to parents or just people encountering kids that are in the middle of this struggle? What would your advice be to them on how they can then help the kids pursue a healthy path?
Well, it's important to first tackle where the influence is coming from. Like, who or what is making them want to be the opposite sex or believe that they can actually become the opposite sex, where that desire, where that belief is coming from. And then dealing with that by either, if it's coming from school, moving schools, or maybe homeschooling, which I know is not the easiest it's not really the easiest option for a lot of parents and families, especially if you're busy, but I think it's very much worth it if you're able to do so. And if it's coming from their peer group or from social media, then you should revoke their phone privileges and social media. And once you feel like they're old enough or ready to use it again, then you should be very, very involved, monitoring whatever they're using, and interacting with them on social media. Just being a parent, being involved in their lives.
And this is coming from an 18-year-old that you may need to revoke social media privileges. So take heed, parents.
I mean, this is coming from somebody who started using social media and really the internet far too young.
Yeah.
I've kind of seen like all of the horrors that it has to offer, and I'm still kind of struggling with like an internet social media addiction. So
I appreciate your honesty.
That's not something that you want to start young.
Yeah, that's a really appropriate warning. Well, I think we'll wrap up today's show with just if you could give people a call to action, both for parents or just people that want to do something about this, and also what you would say to school board members.
Be on the lookout for what's going on in your community. Like, ask your kids when you pick them up from school what they learned, what they talked about with their friends, who they're hanging out with, and be involved in their schooling. Maybe like participate in classrooms and events and such, and attend these school board meetings to see what's on the agenda. And it's not easy to speak out on the subject. I'm lucky to have started speaking out at the age that I have, because I haven't like started. Well, I've had like a few online classes in college, but like I haven't really had. I wasn't employed at the time that I started doing this, and I was already out of high school. So I didn't really have much to lose. But when you start speaking out on this as, say, like a high school student who has to deal with the pressure of like keeping up with grades and trying to make friends and trying to maintain a social life, or if you're a parent or an adult who is working a job, working 9 to 5, is employed, and dealing with a family, there is a lot at risk. But I think that the livelihoods and the well-being of these kids and their education has to be the priority. They don't have a voice.
Wow, that is just so moving and heartbreaking. And what's especially gets your heart is just how she never had that chance as a young girl to address those underlying issues that she's working through now. But the adults in her life did not give her the space to do that, especially the medical and counseling professionals.
Yeah, and one of the things that it's so important that we talk about here and we make sure that there is protections for is people to be able to deal with those underlying issues, and counselors to be able to counsel kids who are gender confused to deal with. Often there's things like anxiety and depression and maybe some trauma from things that have happened to them previously. I know that's something that's part of Chloe's story as well. And it's important that as we counsel children through this, that we take those things into consideration, because that's really often what drives the confusion.
Yeah, we talked about freedom earlier, having the freedom to address those issues and people not telling you can only go one way on this.
Right, exactly. And being able to do that in a safe environment that's not pushing someone into completely unalterable medical choices, but really taking a compassionate look at how we can help them to sort through what is often a pretty common experience of young adulthood.
I did just want to mention a quick update before we wrap up here that you heard us talking to Chloe Cole in this last episode about the battle in Virginia Beach. And, at that time, the governor had not even yet released the parental rights policies. And I am happy to say, very happy to say that shortly after Chloe Cole shared her testimony in that forum, to the school board out there and to the press, that those policies were put into place, and there have been a lot of good action at school boards after that, including in Virginia Beach. So,
we've seen school boards really all around Virginia adopt these, which is exciting. Certainly, there's still places like Fairfax that need some work, but we're moving in the right direction, and it's great to see.
But I will just mention, just to bring you up to speed, after Chloe Cole testified to the Virginia Beach School Board specifically, they did implement, I think there was a parent lawsuit that played into this as well, but they did eventually implement all the most important parts of that policy protecting parental rights. So that was a huge victory. So again, as Jessi said, if you want more encouragement in the midst of all this chaos, be sure to check out the second episode, the second part of the series, episode 136. Remember, we are stronger when we speak together. We will keep getting the truth out there, and we'll see you next time.